James had always believed that Valentine's Day was just another day, except this time he wanted to make it special. For months he had planned the proposal, saved up, thought it through, bought the ring that could blind even the sun, and told himself that Tina, the love of his life, deserved nothing less. She had been the spark in his dull routine, the soft voice that eased his heavy days, and the fire that kept him warm on the coldest nights. So, when the day arrived, he wasn't nervous. He was sure of her. He thought he knew her heart like the back of his hand. But certainty is a dangerous thing. At the fancy restaurant, under a chandelier that dripped crystals like frozen teardrops, he got down on one knee. His heart galloped with excitement as he opened the velvet box to reveal the ring. People clapped prematurely, sensing the joy that was about to unfold. Yet, Tina's face didn't match the happiness in the room. Her eyes flickered with discomfort, and her lips tightened as if holding back words that should never be spoken in moments like this. "James?" she said, her voice trembling in a way that didn't sound like joy. "I can't do this." The clapping stopped. Forks froze mid-air. Even the violinist, sensing something was off, dragged the bow across the strings one last time and went silent. "What do you mean?" James managed to ask, though his throat felt like it was closing. Tina's eyes darted to the side, avoiding his. "I've been meaning to tell you, I met someone else. I didn't want it to come out this way, but it's better than pretending." There it was. The knife, clean and sharp, slid between his ribs and into his chest. People looked away, embarrassed to witness such a personal disaster unfold in public. James stood slowly, still holding the box, the ring inside catching the light mockingly. "You're dumping me," he said, not really asking. Tina swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Then she walked away. Just like that. She walked away on Valentine's Day, leaving James standing alone with his heart in pieces and an overpriced ring burning in his palm. The following weeks blurred into a long stretch of gray days. Friends tried to reach out, but he ignored most of them. He worked too much, drank more than he should have, and avoided places that reminded him of her. He deleted their photos, blocked her number, and tried everything to scrub her from his mind. But no matter what he did, her ghost lingered like a stubborn stain. Then, like a fresh gust of wind in a suffocating room, Louisa came into his life. She wasn't flashy or dramatic like Tina had been. She was the friend of a friend who somehow ended up beside him at a dull office gathering. While James sulked in a corner nursing a glass of whiskey, Louisa leaned over and said, "You look like you lost a bet with life." He smirked despite himself. "Close. Life ran me over with a truck." Louisa had a laugh that felt like sunlight on a winter morning. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel fake. It just felt good. For the first time in weeks, James found himself talking without the weight in his chest crushing him. Louisa listened, really listened, and when he clumsily explained what had happened on Valentine's Day, she didn't offer cheap sympathy. "Sounds like you dodged a bullet," she said simply. That line stuck with him. They started seeing more of each other, not in the way he had planned to see someone new, but in the way two wounded people find comfort in shared bruises. Louisa had her own scars, her own stories of heartbreak that didn't feel so different from his. Slowly, without noticing, they started to laugh more, share longer conversations, and even joke about things James never thought he'd laugh at again. Then, somewhere between casual coffees and late-night chats, an outrageous idea was born. It came out half as a joke, half as a dare. "What if," Louisa said one evening, her eyes gleaming with mischief, "we got married on April Fool's Day, just to flip life off?" James laughed so hard his stomach hurt. But as he looked at her, something inside shifted. What started as a joke suddenly didn't seem so crazy. "Would you actually do it?" he asked. Louisa tilted her head, grinning. "Would you?" James thought about it. About Tina, about Valentine's Day, about the humiliation that had nearly swallowed him whole. He thought about how the world loves to watch people fall but rarely expects them to rise laughing. Yeah, he said, surprising even himself. Let's do it. The days leading up to April Fool's felt strangely electric. What had started as a wild, drunken idea between two wounded souls had somehow taken on a life of its own. Neither James nor Louisa fully understood how it happened. But once they decided, it felt like there was no turning back. Maybe that was the beauty of it. Two people too broken to fear what tomorrow could bring. James didn't bother to tell many people. What would he even say? Hey, I'm marrying a woman I met 2 months after getting dumped in front of a restaurant full of strangers. Oh, and we're doing it on April Fool's Day. No, he kept it simple. The few friends he trusted to share the news with reacted in every way imaginable. Shock, disbelief, laughter, and, oddly, applause. One of those friends was Lee, his closest companion since university days. Lee had seen James through every heartbreak, job loss, and drunken mistake. You're joking, right? Lee said when James told him over beers at their usual pub. No joke. April Fool's wedding, James replied, clinking his bottle against Lee's with a crooked smile. Lee shook his head, though a grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. Mate, you've officially lost your mind. Maybe, James admitted. But you know what? It feels better than losing my heart. Lee took a long pull from his drink, studying his friend. All right then, if you're serious, I'll stand by you. Someone's got to make sure you don't run away screaming. James appreciated that more than he could say, and deep down, a part of him wondered if, come April Fool's, it would be him doing the running. But every time that doubt crept in, Louisa's voice pulled him back. You know, she teased one evening as they flipped through absurd cake designs online. We could get a cake shaped like a whoopee cushion, James chuckled. Tempting. But I think my dignity's suffered enough. Louisa smiled at him in that way that made the air feel lighter. She wasn't Tina. She didn't look at him with expectations or unspoken disappointment. She looked at him like he was enough, exactly as he was, flaws and all. Their connection wasn't born of fairy tale romance. It was built from the ashes of pain, stitched together with laughter and shared defiance against the world. And somehow, that felt more real than any picture-perfect love story. As the big day approached, word began to spread faster than James had expected. What surprised him most was how people responded. Not with ridicule or whispers of mockery, but with cheers. Genuine, rowdy cheers. Friends, co-workers, even casual acquaintances seemed thrilled by the madness of it all. About time someone did something bold around here. An old neighbor shouted when he heard the news. The local bar where James and Louisa had first shared a drink offered to host the after-party free of charge. Even the cynical owner, who rarely smiled, said, "You two have guts. I like that." Somewhere along the way, their impulsive decision had become a symbol of rebellion against heartbreak, against despair, against life's cruel jokes. It felt like they weren't just getting married for themselves, but for everyone who had ever been left alone on Valentine's Day, everyone who had been told love was over for them. Still, not everyone cheered. Tina found out. James wasn't sure. How? He hadn't spoken to her since that awful night, but the universe had a twisted way of keeping wounds fresh. She called him 3 days before the wedding, her number flashing on his screen like a ghost rising from the grave. Against his better judgment, he answered, "James." Her voice was tight, almost cold. "I heard you're getting married." He didn't bother denying it. "That's right." "On April Fool's Day?" she scoffed. "Yes," he said firmly, "and this time no surprises." There was a pause. Then, in a tone edged with bitterness, Tina added, "You're making a fool of yourself." James smiled, a genuine, unbothered smile. "Maybe. But at least I'm not pretending anymore." He hung up before she could respond. When he looked up from his phone, Louisa was watching him from across the room. She didn't ask who it was. She didn't have to. Instead, she crossed the space between them and slipped her arms around his waist. "You okay?" she asked softly. James kissed her forehead. "I've never been better." And he meant it, the Morning of April Fool's Day arrived with a sky so clear it felt like the universe itself had decided to play along with their madness. James woke up early, earlier than he had in months, and for a few moments, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was truly happening. Not a dream, not a prank, just real, raw life happening in the most unexpected way. His phone buzzed with messages, well wishes, jokes about runaway grooms, and an alarming number of memes about April Fool's weddings. One from Lee simply said, "Still time to escape, mate. Blink twice for help." James chuckled to himself, feeling surprisingly calm. No anxiety clawed at his chest, no second-guessing gnawed at his mind. Just this strange, wild calm, as if he'd stepped outside of life's tight grip and found a new way to breathe. By mid-morning, he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his suit. It wasn't extravagant. Simple, classic, no frills. He wanted no traces of the pretenses that had smothered his last relationship. No flashiness, no perfection, just him as he was. When Lee arrived to pick him up, he raised an eyebrow at James's composed expression. "All right, what did you take this morning?" "Valium?" Lee joked, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just a deep breath," James replied, grinning. As they drove to the small community hall that Louisa had chosen for the ceremony, James caught glimpses of familiar faces through the car windows. People waved at him, cheered even. Strangers honked their horns and shouted well wishes as if he were a local hero on a victory parade. It was surreal. When they arrived, the scene was both chaotic and heartwarming. Streamers in ridiculous colors, balloons that read "Gotcha" and "It's a trap" floated in the air. Someone had even set up a sign at the entrance. "Welcome to the wedding of the year, or the joke of the century." Louisa stood near the entrance, laughing at something one of her friends had said. She looked beautiful, not in an overdone, magazine cover way, but in a way that made James's heart squeeze in his chest. She wore a simple white dress, playful yet elegant, and around her neck hung a tiny locket shaped like a question mark. Always the prankster. When their eyes met, she gave him a look that said everything without a single word. "We're really doing this." And they were. The ceremony began with laughter instead of solemnity. The officiant, an old friend of Louisa's, who worked as a stand-up comedian, opened with, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to witness what might just be the bravest prank ever attempted, or the happiest accident of their lives." Everyone erupted in applause and cheers. James barely heard the rest of the words. His eyes were locked on Louisa, and his mind drifted to all the moments that had led to this one. The heartbreak, the public humiliation, the lonely nights when he thought he'd never feel whole again. And yet, here he was, standing in front of a woman who knew his scars and still chose to hold his hand. As they exchanged their vows, they kept them honest and raw. No sugarcoating, no empty promises. "I promise to laugh with you when life plays its tricks," Louisa said, her voice steady but warm. "And to stand beside you, even when the jokes turn cruel." James smiled. "I promise to never let you feel like life's punchline. You're my favorite twist in the story." When they kissed, the crowd went wild. Cheers, whistles, even a few party poppers went off, showering them in confetti. It wasn't a typical wedding, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it unforgettable. As they walked back down the aisle together, Louisa squeezed James's hand tightly. "You know," she whispered, "this might be the first time anyone's ever cheered louder at my wedding than they did at my birthday." James laughed softly. "And it won't be the last." But just as they reached the end of the aisle, something, or rather, someone, unexpected stepped out from the crowd. Tina, dressed in black, as if she were attending a funeral instead of a wedding, her eyes fixed sharply on James and Louisa. For a heartbeat, the festive atmosphere dimmed, like a cloud passing in front of the sun. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her expression was enough. A bitter cocktail of regret, resentment, and something almost like disbelief. Louisa's fingers tightened around James's, but he didn't falter. He met Tina's gaze with a calm that surprised even himself. No anger, no lingering hurt, just quiet understanding and a hint of pity. Then, as if nothing had happened, they walked past Tina without a word, leaving her in the dust of a past that no longer held any power over them. As they stepped outside into the sunlight, surrounded by cheering friends and strangers alike, James felt something inside him finally snap free. Freedom. Absolute, unshakable freedom, and it felt glorious. The celebration spilled into the late afternoon, and James found himself caught in the kind of happiness that didn't feel fragile or forced. It was solid, earned, built from rubble. He and Louisa laughed until their cheeks ached, accepting every wild toast and ridiculous joke that came their way. "Here's to the only couple brave enough to sign their lives away on a prankster's holiday," someone shouted, raising a glass. Glasses clinked all around. James caught Louisa's eye across the noisy room, and they both smiled, wide and full, as if they were in on a secret no one else knew. Outside, kids ran wild with balloons and prank toys, and a makeshift band played off-key love songs that somehow fit the moment perfectly. James noticed how even the small things, the crooked decorations, the deliberately silly cake shaped like an exploding box, the hand-painted banner that read "Fools in Love," all felt oddly beautiful. But despite the warmth of the day, there was one shadow that lingered like a cold breeze at the back of his mind. Tina. Her face at the wedding wasn't something he could just brush off. As if summoned by his thoughts, Lee sidled up to him, a fresh drink in hand. "Thought she'd pull something dramatic," Lee murmured, keeping his voice low beneath the hum of chatter. James glanced around, but there was no sign of Tina now. It was as if she'd melted back into whatever darkness she came from. "Maybe seeing us happy was dramatic enough," he replied, trying to shake it off. Lee gave a small, approving nod. "Good answer." Louisa soon rejoined them, slipping her arm naturally around James's waist. She sensed the slight tension but chose not to prod it. Instead, she leaned close and said playfully, "We still have to cut the disaster cake." James laughed, feeling her presence burn away the chill Tina had left behind. "Then let's give them a show." The cake cutting became a performance. Louisa, in her usual mischievous way, smeared a bit of frosting on James's nose, earning a chorus of cheers from the crowd. James retaliated by dabbing a small dollop on her cheek, only to have her chase him around the table with a handful of icing. They were fools, and they loved every second of it. After the laughter settled and people began to gather in smaller circles, James found a quiet moment with Louisa near the edge of the festivities. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting a golden glow over everything. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her eyes following the fading light. "Do you regret it?" Louisa asked softly, her voice more curious than worried. James thought about it, about everything that had led them to this moment. The public humiliation, the sleepless nights, the doubt, the risk of marrying someone he hadn't known for a lifetime, but who understood him more deeply than anyone else ever had. "No," he answered honestly. "Not for a second." Louisa's smile was quiet but full of meaning. "Good, because I was terrified you'd wake up today and run for the hills." James chuckled, brushing his lips against her temple. "If I ever run, it'll be with you." They stood like that for a moment, the noise of the party fading into the background. There was something deeply comforting about her steady presence, her warmth against him, her laughter still lingering in the air. But peace is never left alone, for long. Just as they were enjoying the calm, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "James, we need to talk." Tina again. She stood a few steps away, her posture stiff, her arms crossed over her chest. Around them, conversation stilled as people noticed the tension. James felt Louisa stiffen at his side, but he gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay," he whispered, though even he wasn't sure it was. With a deep breath, James turned to face Tina fully. "There's nothing left to say," he told her, keeping his tone even, but Tina wasn't there for polite exchanges. "You made a fool of yourself," she spat, her voice rising. "You think this is love? You think a wedding like this is real? James held her gaze, steady and unwavering. It's more real than anything we ever had. Tina's eyes glistened, though whether it was from anger or regret, he couldn't tell. She hesitated, her lips parting as if to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she shook her head slowly, as though she couldn't believe the man standing in front of her was the same man she had once left behind. With a bitter scoff, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by the people and the noise of a celebration she no longer belonged to. Louisa watched her go, then looked at James, her eyes searching his face. Are you all right? James didn't hesitate. I've never been better. He meant it. For once, he meant it with every beat of his heart. As evening faded into night, the party only grew louder. It wasn't the polished kind of celebration you'd expect at a carefully planned wedding. No, this was messy, wild, and alive, exactly the way James wanted it. Laughter came easy, drinks flowed like rivers, and, for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He wasn't thinking about mistakes or heartbreak or even Tina's bitter farewell. He was just there, living with Louisa by his side. The two of them ended up stealing moments away from the chaos whenever they could. They would slip outside to the back of the hall, where the night was cooler and quieter, and breathe in the calm between storms of excitement. James loved those little moments the most. In them, Louisa felt even more like home. Married life suits you, Louisa teased, as they leaned against the old brick wall behind the hall, her eyes dancing with mischief. James smiled at her, a genuine, unguarded smile. You're not so bad yourself, Mrs. Hartley. She wrinkled her nose at the name Playful. Still feels strange. You'll get used to it, he said, and they both laughed softly. Their private moment didn't last long. The door to the hall creaked open and Lee popped his head out, grinning like a man who'd already had too much champagne. Oi, lovebirds, you're missing the most outrageous toast of the night, Louisa grinned. Who's giving it? Your uncle, Lee replied, chuckling. He's 3 sheets to the wind and talking about goats for some reason. James shook his head with a laugh. That sounds too good to miss. They followed Lee back inside, where Louisa's uncle was indeed halfway through an unbelievable story involving 2 goats, a broken fence, and what he called the meaning of true commitment. The crowd was in stitches, wiping tears from their eyes. As the night wore on, something strange began to happen, something James hadn't expected. People kept approaching him, not just to offer congratulations, but to say something deeper, something that caught him off guard. You gave us hope, one middle-aged woman said, clutching his hand. My husband left me last year, and I thought that was the end of love for me. But watching you two, it makes me wonder if maybe it's not too late. Another guest, a younger man with red-rimmed eyes, admitted softly, I almost didn't come tonight. Seeing what happened to you on Valentine's, I thought, what's the point of risking love? But you proved it's worth it. James hadn't set out to inspire anyone. He hadn't done this to make a statement. Yet somehow, this wild, reckless wedding had become more than just a rebound or a joke. It had become a rebellion against heartbreak itself. A living, breathing reminder that life could kick you down, tear you apart, humiliate you in front of the world, and still, you could rise. You could rise and laugh right in its face. As the guests continued celebrating, James and Louisa found themselves pulled into a spontaneous dance in the middle of the hall. The music wasn't elegant. It was fast, messy, full of energy. But they danced anyway, clumsy and uncoordinated, stepping on each other's feet and laughing too hard to care. Around them, the crowd clapped to the beat, cheering them on as if this was the grand finale of a show they never wanted to end. Looks like they really did cheer for us, Louisa said breathlessly, spinning in his arms. James tightened his hold on her and replied with a grin, Let them. We earned it. But even as he said it, a flicker of unease passed through him, just for a second. He caught sight of someone near the entrance, lingering at the edge of the shadows. His pulse quickened when he realized it was Tina again. She wasn't alone this time. Standing beside her was a man James didn't recognize, a sharp-dressed stranger with cold eyes and a too-perfect smirk. They were watching him and Louisa dance, their expressions unreadable, like two storm clouds on the edge of a bright sky. James's gaze narrowed. Louisa followed his line of sight and spotted them, her brows drawing together. "Friends of yours?" she asked, her tone light but cautious. "No," James answered, his voice tightening. "Not anymore." Tina's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. Then, without warning, she turned and whispered something into the man's ear. He nodded once, and together, they slipped out the door and vanished into the night. James wanted to believe it was over, that Tina had come for one last look at the life she threw away and finally let it go. But something about that cold, deliberate exit crawled under his skin. Still, he pushed the thought aside. Tonight wasn't about her. Tonight belonged to him and Louisa, to their reckless love story and the cheers of the crowd who believed in them. It belonged to second chances and the sweet revenge of living well when the world expects you to crumble. As he held Louisa close and danced beneath the strings of mismatched lights, James decided that whatever storm might be brewing outside, he would face it with her. Together, they had already survived the worst day of his life. Everything else was just noise. The celebrations had stretched deep into the night, and though the guests slowly began to trickle out, their energy left a pulse in the air that refused to die down. The music lingered in James's mind, even as the hall quieted and the lights dimmed to a soft, warm glow. Louisa was still laughing, her cheeks flushed from the excitement, her eyes bright and alive. James couldn't stop watching her. She had this way of making the whole room disappear. Even now, with empty glasses and confetti scattered across the floor, all he saw was her, his wife. It felt strange to think the word, but in the best way possible. They found a quiet corner, slumping into mismatched chairs, exhausted but exhilarated. Louisa kicked off her shoes, rubbing her sore feet and laughing softly. "Remind me never to dance that much in heels again." James reached over and gently massaged her ankle, smiling at her playfully. "I warned you, remember? I distinctly remember saying, 'Louisa, those shoes are a trap.'" She sighed dramatically. "And did I listen?" "Of course not. That would have ruined my image as a stubborn fool." He chuckled, and for a moment it felt like they had escaped the world entirely. But that small shadow from earlier, the image of Tina and the stranger, by her side, lingered at the edges of his thoughts like a stubborn thorn. Louisa noticed his gaze drifting. She wasn't the type to ignore things. "You're thinking about her again, aren't you?" James hesitated, then nodded. There was no point lying to her. "I can't shake the feeling that she didn't just show up to watch." Louisa's expression darkened slightly, but she kept her voice calm. "You think she's going to cause trouble?" "I don't know," James admitted. Maybe she's just bitter. Maybe she just wanted to see if we'd really go through with it." Louisa met his eyes, steady and strong. Let her watch. Let her see everything she gave up. Let her feel it. There was steel in her words, and James felt a flicker of pride stir in his chest. Louisa wasn't the type to be shaken by ghosts of the past. She'd been through her own storms and had no patience for people who tried to drag her back into the rain. "Besides," she added, reaching out to lace her fingers with his, "we're not afraid of shadows, are we?" "No," James said, tightening his grip on her hand. "Not anymore." Just then, Lee appeared, still energized despite the hour. He wore a grin wide enough to split his face in half. "All right, lovebirds," he said, waving 2 glasses of leftover champagne. "One last toast before we shut this madness down." James accepted a glass, raising it high. Louisa did the same. "To fools in love," Lee declared, grinning like the devil himself. "To fools in love," they echoed, clinking their glasses together. The sharp fizz of the champagne hit James's tongue, but before he could fully savor the moment, The hall's back door creaked open with an unsettling slowness. James stiffened immediately. It wasn't a guest. It wasn't one of the staff cleaning up. No, this was something else entirely. The same man from earlier, the sharp-dressed stranger, stepped inside. Alone this time. His cold, watchful eyes scanned the nearly empty room until they landed, squarely on James and Louisa. The festive atmosphere thinned like smoke caught by the wind. Lee noticed too and instinctively stepped closer to James, lowering his glass. "Friend of yours?" he asked in a quieter voice, suspicion creeping into his tone. James shook his head slowly. Not even close. The stranger approached with the measured calm of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He stopped a few paces away, straightened the cuffs of his jacket, and let a faint smirk play on his lips. "Congratulations," he said smoothly, his voice laced with something sharp beneath the surface. "Lovely wedding," James's jaw tightened. "You're not here for the cake, I take it." The man's smirk grew. "No, I'm here for a different reason." His gaze shifted briefly to Louisa, then back to James. "Let's just say, some people find it hard to let things go." Louisa rose to her feet slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Tina sent you." He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to James like it was a winning lottery ticket, but James didn't move to take it. "What is that?" James asked, keeping his voice steady. "An invitation," the man replied coolly. "Tina thought you might like to attend a little gathering tomorrow. One last conversation. Closure, if you will." James stared at the paper like it was a venomous snake. He had no intention of stepping back into Tina's twisted web. "Not now, not ever." "Tell her I already have my closure," he said firmly. But the man didn't flinch. "Then at least read it, for curiosity's sake." There was something in his tone that unnerved James. A certainty. A quiet threat tucked beneath polite words. Louisa reached out and took the paper before James could stop her. She unfolded it and skimmed the contents. As she read, her face hardened, her playful spark dimming under the weight of whatever the letter contained. "What is it?" James asked, his chest tightening. Louisa's eyes lifted to meet his, steady but serious. "It's not a conversation she wants," Louisa said grimly. "It's a challenge." James's blood chilled. The stranger smiled thinly, satisfied that the message had been delivered. "I'll leave you to think about it," he said, turning on his heel and walking out as quietly as he had come. As the door swung closed behind him, a heavy silence settled over the room. James looked at Louisa, at the paper in her hand, at the fading lights of their wedding night. So much for happily ever after. James took the paper from Louisa's hand, his eyes scanning the neat, deliberate handwriting that carried a poison under its polish. Every word felt like a trap disguised as courtesy, a riddle where every answer led to something worse. Tina had crafted it well, too well. "James, for old time's sake, and for the dignity you still pretend to carry, I invite you to meet me tomorrow. Evening? One last time. Not to fight, not to plead, but to settle what you've left unfinished. I think you owe me that much. Bring her too, your new bride. She deserves to hear what you never had the courage to say. It wasn't just no, it was bait. Perfect, elegant bait." James felt a quiet fury rising in his chest. Tina couldn't stand it. That he'd moved on. That he'd found joy in the ruins she left behind. And now she wanted to drag him back, just to watch him squirm. She had always played these kinds of games, but this time, she had underestimated one thing. He wasn't the same man she had humiliated on Valentine's Day. Louisa watched him carefully, reading the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled tightly around the paper as if he could crush it into dust. "She wants to make a scene," Louisa said softly, her voice laced with clarity. "She wants you to come crawling, begging for closure so she can watch you break again." "She won't get it," James replied through gritted teeth, but Louisa's gaze didn't waver. James, listen to me. If we go together. No hesitation, no weakness. Her strength in that moment filled him with a fierce, burning gratitude. She wasn't just his partner in happiness, she was his shield in the storm. And Tina, for all her games, could never match that. Lee, who had remained quietly nearby, finally spoke up. You sure about this? Because something tells me this isn't going to be a friendly chat over coffee. James looked at him and then back at Louisa. His decision was already made. We face it, James said. Not for her. For us. Louisa gave a sharp nod. Then we face it head on. The next day dawned with a brittle tension in the air, as if the very sky sensed what was to come. James barely slept. His mind reeled through every possibility, every cruel trick Tina might have prepared. But more than fear, there was a simmering defiance growing inside him. He had walked through fire once before. He could do it again. And this time he wouldn't come out burned. Louisa dressed in simple clothes, practical but strong, and James did the same. No wedding costumes today, no decorations, no pretense. Just two people prepared to face whatever storm awaited them. They arrived at the address Tina had left, a private lounge tucked behind a row of office buildings, far from the noisy streets and cheering crowds of the day before. It was quiet. Too quiet. James pushed open the heavy door and they stepped inside. The place smelled of old wood and expensive desperation, velvet chairs, dark curtains, low amber lights. It had the feel of somewhere people went to make decisions they'd regret later. Tina sat at the far end of the room, waiting like a spider at the center of its web. The sharp-dressed man from the night before stood behind her, his arms folded across his chest like a loyal guard dog. Tina's eyes flicked over them, her lips curling into a smug, practiced smile. You came, she said, as though victory was already hers. James kept his expression neutral. Get to the point. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Straight to business? No warm greetings for old lovers? Louisa stepped forward, her chin high, her presence radiating calm fire. We don't have time for your theater, Tina. A flash of irritation crossed Tina's face, but she recovered quickly. She gestured to the seat across from her. Sit. Indulge me, at least. James hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair. Louisa stayed standing, her eyes never leaving Tina's face. What do you want? James asked, voice steady as stone. Tina tapped her manicured fingers against the table, a rhythm as sharp as her words. I want you to admit it, she said, coolly. That you married her to get back at me. That you stood in front of your crowd yesterday, pretending you were over me when all you really wanted was to make me jealous. James met her gaze without blinking. You think too highly of yourself. But Tina only smiled wider, as if she had been waiting for that answer. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing to slits. Do I? Then why are you here? Because I don't like unfinished business, James replied coldly, and I don't like bullies. The man behind Tina shifted his weight, as if ready for confrontation. But Louisa's sharp voice cut through the tension like a blade. You ended this the day you humiliated him in front of a room full of strangers, she said, her tone steady and merciless. You lost your chance at explanations, at second thoughts, at power over him. Tina's mask slipped, if only for a second. Something desperate flickered in her eyes. She hadn't expected Louisa to be this unshakable. She hadn't expected them to be this united. James saw it. He seized the moment. You wanted us to fall apart after you left, James said, rising from his chair. His voice grew stronger, louder, as if fueled by every piece of pain she had ever given him. You wanted to believe you'd broken me for good. But look at me. He reached for Louisa's hand, holding it up like a victory flag. Look at us. We're still standing, and we're not going anywhere. Tina's face twisted into something bitter, ugly beneath her carefully applied mask. She rose to her feet, fury flaring in her voice. You're a fool, James. You're a fool if you think this is love. You're a fool for believing she's any different from me. Louisa didn't flinch. She stepped closer to James and answered with quiet thunder, "Then let us be fools." With that, they turned their backs to Tina and walked out, leaving her and her hollow threats behind in the suffocating gloom of that empty lounge. As they stepped into the open air, into the cool breath of freedom, James felt something inside him break loose at last. Not fear, not regret, but relief. Pure, unshakable relief. They had faced the storm, and they had walked away together. The moment they left that lounge behind, it felt like a weight had been cut from James's chest. He took a deep breath, as if tasting clean air for the first time in months. Louisa still held his hand, her grip firm, steady, like she wasn't just holding him but anchoring him to the ground. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Words would have only cheapened the power of what they had just done. As they walked down the empty street, James finally broke the silence with a rough exhale. "It's over." Louisa shot him a look that was half smile, half warning. "Don't say that too soon." James knew she was right. Tina wasn't the type to slink away quietly into the shadows just because she lost face. No. If anything, Tina was like a flame starved of oxygen. Desperate, dangerous, unpredictable. And after what had just happened in that lounge, she would be burning hotter than ever. But even knowing that, James felt stronger than before. Maybe it was the way Louisa stood beside him without flinching. Maybe it was the crowd that had cheered them on, the people who saw them not as fools, but as warriors fighting against the odds. Or maybe it was the realization that Tina no longer held the strings to his life. "She wanted us to fall apart in front of her," Louisa said as they kept walking, her eyes straight ahead. "She wanted to see cracks between us." James tightened his hold on her hand. She saw the opposite. They took a turn toward the riverside, where the city lights shimmered across the water. It was quieter here, away from the noise and the heat of conflict. The gentle lap of the river against the bank was almost enough to wash away the tension still buzzing beneath James's skin. Almost. Louisa pulled him to a stop beneath the old iron bridge. The place was deserted, peaceful. "Look at me," she said softly. James turned to her, and in her eyes he saw not fear, not doubt, but fire. "Whatever happens next," Louisa continued, "we face it together." James nodded without hesitation. "Always." Her lips curved into a slight smile, but it faded as she added, "Because something tells me Tina's not done. Not yet." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that Tina had shown her last card and lost. But deep down, he couldn't pretend. Tina was the type who didn't accept defeat gracefully. She was a woman who had torn him apart once for sport, and seeing him rise from the ashes hand in hand with Louisa would have driven her mad. "She'll try something desperate," Louisa warned. "People like her always do." James exhaled, the cold night air sharp in his lungs. "Let her try." As if their words had summoned fate itself, James's phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. His stomach knotted as he pulled it free and checked the screen. An unknown number. He answered, putting it on speaker so Louisa could hear. At first, there was only silence. Then, Tina's voice, tight, clipped, far colder than before. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think walking away makes you free of me?" James kept his voice steady. "You're a chapter I've closed." But Tina laughed, bitter and sharp. "Chapters can be reopened, James, and this time, I'm not playing nice." There was a click as she ended the call. James lowered the phone, slowly, his jaw tight. Louisa didn't flinch. "She's bluffing." But even as she said it, her eyes darkened with concern. They knew better. Tina's pride had been shattered, her power stripped away in front of their eyes. And now she was a wounded predator, dangerous in her desperation. What could she possibly do? James muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Louisa's answer was quiet but certain. Anything. She's already done the unforgivable once. They stood in the cold silence for a while longer, thoughts heavy in their minds. Then, Louisa touched his face gently, forcing him to meet her gaze. No matter what she tries, we stand. We don't run. We don't bend. We don't give her the satisfaction. James searched her eyes and found in them the strength he'd always needed, the strength he thought he had to find alone. But he didn't. Louisa was his strength. She was the shield against every shadow Tina tried to throw at him, and he wouldn't. Let Tina take that away. Together, he said. Louisa's eyes softened. Together. They left the riverside behind, stepping back into the city's glow, where life kept moving as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something irreversible. They weren't fools anymore. They were survivors, and Tina, no matter how hard she tried, would never break them again.